All right, Fivers. Let's talk about the death of characters in comics. And every so many years, this seems to kind of crop up and people have a discussion about it. The most recent one, and the reason why I'm talking about this in this video, is that they decided at Marvel, well, who knows who actually makes the decisions over there anymore, decided to kill off Professor Xavier from the X-Men. Now, I'm not necessarily against killing characters off. And the reason why is because really it has to do with context. Context really is everything when it comes to writing. And the context can sometimes be driven by a need to push the story forward or to elevate another character. Let's think about Alan Moore. So Alan Moore created The Watchmen for DC, which I think he regrets. It would have worked better as a intellectual property for himself. But at the time, that's what you did. You created characters for the large companies. When Alan Moore took over Swamp Thing, I believe that when he was writing that character, I wouldn't go so far as to say that he revered that character of Swamp Thing, but he definitely had a pretty healthy respect for that character. And he had a respect for storytelling. I don't always know what's going on in writers' heads at any given moment, but we can look in the past and we can take some guesses about particular time periods in hindsight. When Alan Moore was writing The Watchmen, and don't worry, I'm going to circle back and get back to Xavier in just a couple of minutes here. When he was writing Watchmen and it was time for Rorschach to die, Rorschach was killed in the end because he was not going to compromise. He was not going to cover something up, and he was not going to lie to people. He cared more about truth and justice than the other characters thought. The end justifies the means. Now, you typically will have people that will fall in those categories. People who are not willing to compromise, and that truth will set you free, and that justice is objective. And then you have other people that want to manipulate and craft what their vision, what they think is how the world should be, and they will do whatever they can, whether it's moral or immoral. That death of Rorschach was very much needed to push that point to its ultimate end. The death of Rorschach had meaning and purpose, even though people didn't like it. I certainly didn't like it because, from my standpoint, I want that character to win. He was a brutal character, but at least he had some kind of moral compass. Let's think about the death of Superman for a second. I think that it broke some of the readership because Superman really was the ultimate beacon. When they killed Superman, it didn't really seem to have a specific point, or none that I can really decipher. All right, so let's fast forward to now. This is more relevant news about the death of Professor Xavier. When I'm talking about the death of Xavier here, I'm not specifically saying that that book was bad that was published, or that was poorly written, or that the art was bad, or anything like that. What I'm talking about here is the approach of a writer. When writers began to observe the real power of these characters as they're being translated to successful films, specifically in the Marvel Universe, and that these were the types of films that were getting greenlit all the time versus original stories, because studios needed a bankable, as they always have. They want to produce bankable films. I believe that started to draw in a lot of people that did not care about comics. They did not care about the audience or the readers of comics. And so when you don't care about something, you don't approach it from a respectful manner. And especially sometimes artists, and I say artists as a catch-all, whether they're visual artists or whether they're artists of the written word, I'm one of those. I can write, I can draw, and I do, and I create comics. And because of that, I know I'm on the inside of it sometimes, and I see the behavior of some of these people, and it is highly narcissistic. The arts are rife with narcissism. I'm not saying that doesn't happen in other jobs as well, but it is particularly acute in the art industries or the arts in general. And people can argue with me about that. I understand. And you'll have excellent people. Just recently I went to a fan expo and I met a variety of artists and I met a variety of writers, and they're humans just like anyone else. And I met some awesome guys. Now, but that doesn't mean that what I said about the industry being rife with narcissism is not accurate. I believe it's truly accurate. And anybody who's spent enough time in there and they don't have starry eyes, which is a common thing that happens, when they remove that, they can quickly see the behavior of some of these people. The reason why Xavier's so important is because he was the anchor point for these, let's call them kids initially. He was the anchor point. He was the father figure for these characters who were born differently and who had powers they oftentimes could not understand or control. And he was the figure that they needed. You know, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created this character. And when you have an anchor point to something, when you cut that anchor away, you're drifting. And so why would a writer do this? Well, if you go back to what I just said, does the death of that character serve a purpose? I don't particularly think so. And one of the reasons why is because they decided to destroy his reputation. Okay, so they created an artificial problem, and then they wanted to solve it by saying, well, he's not very good, so he's got to die. Well, what purpose does that actually serve to the reader? And when I say the reader, I'm saying that some readers have more experience with these characters than these writers who are actually writing it. And when a writer gets on a book and they have to produce monthly, I get it. Sometimes when you have to produce the same thing over and over again, it can get maybe perhaps as a writer a little bit boring. But that's an indication of two things. If it gets too boring for the writer is not experienced enough to unlock parts of their artistic journey where they can keep it fresh for themselves and for the reader. Perhaps they've reached a bit of a wall with that character or those characters. And that's an indication that they need to move on. When you wreck the core elements of those characters, people don't view them in the same way. And this is why a lot of people are walking away from these characters now after so many years of collecting them. Yes, there are completionists out there who will buy the book and stuff it away. I was guilty of that for quite a few years when it came to Spider-Man. The nuts and bolts of this is that these writers the writers currently on the X-Men who killed off Xavier, they do not know what to do with his character. They can't identify with the character because they can't identify with probably anybody else but themselves. If you start to write yourself into these comics, and they've been around for decades, there's something wrong with your writing. So I just think that these writers need to move on, and they need to find someone like a young Alan Moore who respects the characters and who can take the reader on a journey that the reader actually deserves.